It started like any other traffic stop, but what happened next left everyone speechless. A white police officer pulled over a black woman for what seemed like a routine check. She remained calm and respectful, answering his questions as he asked for her license and registration. But as the interaction unfolded, things took a tense turn. The officer grew impatient, assuming she wasn't who she claimed to be. Despite her composed demeanor, he decided to escalate, handcuffs and all. What he didn't know was that the woman he was arresting wasn't just anyone. She was a respected judge, a symbol of justice herself. What happens when the power dynamic unexpectedly flips? How will the officer react when he realizes who she is? This story shines a light on unconscious bias, the importance of accountability, and a moment that no one involved will ever forget. Stay tuned for the full story. The officer's tone grew firm as he asked the woman to step out of her car. She complied without resistance, her steady composure catching him off guard. She calmly tried to explain her position, but he wasn't listening. To him, she was just another person making excuses. The situation drew the attention of a few bystanders, their quiet murmurs adding to the tension in the air. As the officer began to cuff her, the woman gave him one final chance to reconsider. "Officer, you're making a mistake," she said evenly, her voice steady but filled with meaning. But he dismissed her words, convinced he was in the right. What the officer failed to see was the weight of the moment unfolding in front of him. He had no idea of the consequences his actions would bring, not just for her, but for himself as well. The truth was about to come out. As the officer led the woman toward his patrol car, she stayed composed, her expression calm but unreadable. Onlookers began pulling out their phones, sensing that something wasn't quite right. One man whispered, "I think she's somewhat important," but no one dared step in. Meanwhile, the officer, convinced he was just doing his job, radioed in to report the arrest. He didn't notice the slight shift in her demeanor when she heard him say her full name. The officer paused for a second, repeating her name as if it rang a bell, but quickly brushed it off. "You're not above the law," he muttered. What he didn't realize was how much weight her name carried. She wasn't just a judge. She was someone who had fought tirelessly for justice, fairness, and equality, principles he had just violated. Back at the station, the booking process began, but whispers had already started among the staff. Eyes widened as her identity was confirmed, and tension began to ripple through the room. The officer, still unaware, carried on, while she quietly waited for the inevitable shift that was about to turn the situation on its head. As the officer processed the paperwork, the tension in the station grew thicker. A senior staff member walked over, glanced at the officer, and then at the woman in cuffs. "Do you even know who she is?" he asked in a low, urgent tone. The officer froze, his confidence flickering for the first time. He glanced at the woman, now sitting calmly in the holding area, her sharp yet composed gaze fixed on him. Suddenly, the whispers turned into hushed conversations, and other officers began to glance at her with a mix of shock and unease. The officer's mind raced as he quickly pulled up her name in the system. His face went pale. This wasn't just any routine arrest. He had cuffed a judge. Not just any judge, but one known for her outspoken advocacy against racial profiling and systemic bias. The weight of what he had done hit him all at once. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room on him, waiting to see what he would do next. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he turned to her, realizing that this wasn't just a mistake. It could cost him everything. But the woman didn't flinch. She waited, her silence speaking louder than any words ever could. Just as the officer began to stammer an apology, the station doors swung open, and in walked a sharply dressed man with an air of authority. He introduced himself as the judge's legal counsel, but his presence carried a deeper significance. The tension in the room skyrocketed as it became clear that this wasn't just about a wrongful arrest. It was about to become something much bigger. The lawyer handed over documents that not only confirmed her identity, but detailed her recent involvement in a high-profile case targeting corruption within law enforcement. The officer's heart sank. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a moment that could unravel everything he thought he knew. The judge's silence up until now wasn't just patience. It was strategy. She had been observing, letting him walk further into his mistake. And now, with her lawyer present and her name officially on record, the tables were turning in ways he couldn't control. Meanwhile, the room buzzed with unease as officers exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was a situation that could bring scrutiny to the entire department. The officer looked at the judge, realizing she wasn't just sitting quietly. She was waiting for the right moment to speak. And when she did, the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of the station. The station fell silent as the judge finally stood up, her calm demeanor now carrying an undeniable authority. She stepped forward, facing the officer directly. "I tried to warn you," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "But you chose not to listen." Her words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. The officer opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Before anyone could react further, the judge's lawyer turned to the senior staff member. "We'll be filing formal complaints, not just for wrongful arrest, but for how this department conducts itself," he said firmly. The officer's face turned pale, and the weight of his actions began to sink in. But just as the judge was about to leave, she paused and looked back. "I'm not here to ruin careers," she said. "I'm here to teach lessons. Officer, it's not too late to learn what justice really means." Her tone was neither angry nor forgiving. It was challenging, leaving him with a choice. The officer, visibly shaken, took a step forward. I'm sorry," he stammered. It was sincere, but the judge simply nodded, turning away. As she left the station, the room was left in stunned silence. But as the officer looked down at her case file, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small, handwritten note. It read, "True justice is about actions, not authority. Think about the choices you make." For the first time, he realized this moment wasn't just a reckoning for him, it was a chance to change. As the judge walked out of the station, the officer stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Her words and the note lingered in his mind, forcing him to confront his actions in a way he never had before. This wasn't just about her title or the mistake he made. It was about the biases and assumptions that had guided his choices. The department soon launched an internal review, spurred by the judge's formal complaint. Training sessions on unconscious bias were implemented, and policies were revised. The officer, though shaken, took this as an opportunity to reflect and grow. He realized that the moment could have ended much worse had the judge not handled the situation with such grace and restraint. For the judge, it wasn't about revenge, it was about change. As she returned to her courtroom, she hoped that this encounter would leave a lasting impact, proving that even small moments of accountability can pave the way for greater justice.